Appreciate it. It's Burn It Down with Kim Brown. An update on the collapse of the Key Bridge in Baltimore, which collapsed after being struck by a cargo ship container. The federal government has already pledged millions of dollars in support and aid, assistance to be offered to those who have been impacted by the bridge collapse, including the families of those workers who perished after being on the bridge when it fell into the river. Six people lost their lives in that incident, and the concern about thousands of people's jobs in and around the port of Baltimore being impacted has been a concern. But fret not, everybody. President Joey B was on the JOB. Joe Biden showed up in Baltimore to stand alongside Governor Melonhead Moore. Ooh, if y'all could have seen Wes Moore, I'm gonna show y'all a clip of this Biden press conference, or this address, I should say. He was outside, but Wes Moore was clapping. Wes Moore was like, "That's how you tell him, boss." I mean, I think I even seen Wes Moore call him boss. He said, "Oh, boss, that's what you said, boss. That sounded real good, boss." And Joey said, "Boy, I know." Anyway, so after Joe Biden made, all of his platitudes and promises to the people and workers of Baltimore, he started to reflect on the namesake of the bridge, Francis Scott Key Bridge. And Francis Scott Key, for those that don't know, was a native Marylander during the 1800s. Francis Scott Key wrote the Star Spangled Banner, which is why any of y'all have ever heard his name. But unfortunately, Francis Scott Key's biography has been abbreviated and somewhat lost to history. But fret not, kids. I did my Googles today. But anyway, I want y'all to listen to why I hate Democrats. Because just like Maryland Congressman, Democratic Congressman a couple of weeks ago, David Trone misused the term where he meant to say bugaboo and instead said jigaboo for reasons nobody understands. Now, granted, he wasn't saying it at a black person, but it's still a anti-black racial sir. Sir, why did you have jigaboo percolating in your brain? What was going on there? But the hypocrisy of Democrats who always, or at least modern Democrats, recent Democrats, have bemoaned racism and the racism of Trump and the racism of DeSantis. And we've got to make everything right. We've got to take down these Confederate statues. We have got to rename some of these roadways and schools that are named after known racists and traitors to the Republic, outright Confederates. We've got to make this right. And then here come Joe Biden, seemingly obtuse or unconcerned that Francis Scott Key himself was an enslaver. So listen to the lavish praise and patriotic that Joe Biden lays on us, with Maryland's first black governor standing behind him. Listen to all of this pile of stinking shit that Joe Biden says nicely about Francis Scott Fuckboy Key. Let's hear it.
As a matter of fact, as I said, my great-great-grandfather worked here as a waterman in this bay. This port is older than our republic, and it's been through tough times before. During the War of 1812, a young Marylander named Francis Scott Key, to whom the bridge was named after, sat in a boat in this very harbor, and he watched the British troops launch an attack after attack on American forces. But as the dawn broke, we saw the American flag still flying. Baltimore was still standing, and our nation, as he wrote in the Star Spangled Banner, had made it through.
Right. So there is that. And that is how Francis Scott Key is largely remembered. But I'd like to tell y'all a little bit more about Francis Scott Key. Now, a lot of times Well, let me say this. Recently, people have pointed out that there was a third stanza in the Star Spangled Banner in which Francis Scott Key made a reference to the wretched black bodies or whatever. There's lots of YouTube videos about that if you're not familiar with the third stanza of the Star Spangled Banner. Go investigate that. But that's not what I'm here to tell y'all about. So, Francis Scott Key, by the way, who owned slaves his entire life. Um, when he died, he was in ownership. Let me not say slaves, let me say enslaved Africans. He was in ownership of 8 enslaved people. He usually kept a collection of about, let's say, 5 to 7 enslaved Africans in his service, in his involuntary service, his entire life. Okay, he's from Frederick County, Maryland, etc. But so when that 1812 battle happened in Baltimore and he wrote the Star Spangled Banner, after that, Francis Scott Fuckboy Key, who was an attorney, he went to serve as the U.S. Attorney for the District of Columbia while Andrew Jackson was president. Okay. And while Francis Scott Key was serving as the U.S. Attorney of D.C., he actually ended up trying one of the most famous cases at the time, a case that I had not heard of before today. And it has to do with a white abolitionist named Reuben Crandall. Okay. Wait, Will, do you have the picture of Francis Scott? There you go. Look at that fuck boy. Look at that fucking smug ass, arrogant, enslaved African owning. God knows how he treated them. Piece of shit right there. That's who Joe Biden. Look at this nigga ascot. Nigga, Roland Martin rock his ascot way better than that. Dog, nigga, you wish. You wish. You wish. Francis Scott fuckboy. Get it. Yo, keep him up there. Keep him up there. Fuck it. Just look at that face. Let me tell y'all about Francis Scott fuckboy Key out this bitch. So Francis Scott Fuckboy, after he did what he did, then the Barkis, red glare, all that bullshit. Francis Scott Key had been longly ridiculed by abolitionists at the time because he would because of the bullshit he propaganda that he penned in the Star Spangled Banner about the home of the free and the land of the brave. Abolitionist was like, what the fuck are you talking about, nigga? You own slaves. Shut the fuck up. And as a result, when Francis Scott Key became the U.S. Attorney for D.C., he made it a point to use the power of his office to target abolitionists. Okay. Now, in D.C. at the time, D.C. was very much about the slavery. But at the time, the population of free black people in Washington, D.C. had swelled tremendously, like hundreds of thousands of free black folks living in D.C. And baby, the whites unhappy. The whites not pleased, okay, with the situation. So this brings me to Reuben Crandall. This is not Reuben Crandall on screen, by the way, but that's Francis Scott Fuckboy. But I'm gonna tell you about Reuben Crandall. I could not find a picture of Reuben, but Reuben, a white, okay? Now, Reuben was an abolitionist who was originally from Rhode Island, okay? He is the brother of Prudence Crandall. For those who you want to read about a white woman who was absolutely about it, go fuck with Prudence Crandall. Go Google her of Connecticut. But anyway, Reuben Crandall left Rhode Island, went to Yale, ended up in Washington, D.C., and was known as an abolitionist. And in fact, he was so well known as an abolitionist, the whites was coming for Reuben. Okay. Now I'm gonna take y'all to the summer of 1835. Summer of 1835. There are multiple things occurring in the nation's capital simultaneously. In late July, workers at Washington's Navy Yard, who were mechanics and carpenters, overwhelmingly white workers, went on strike. Why were they going on strike? Well, they're pissed because of they fear that they are experiencing competition from free black workers who the whites say are stealing their wages because they are willing to do the work for less money. Oh my God, where have we heard this before? So the whites is upset because the free blacks is doing the labor at cheaper wages than they. And they are on strike and they're pissed. Okay. That's happening late July 1835. August the 10th of 1835. Mr. Crandall, not pictured, Reuben Crandall, is attacked and sought down by a white lynch mob because of his abolitionist activities. The racist white lynch mob was so determined to hang Reuben Crandall that the militia had to be called out by DC's mayor at the time to basically save Reuben Crandall, but he was not saved. In fact, he was arrested. Why was Reuben Crandall, white man, arrested? He was arrested and charged with seditious libel and also charged with inciting enslaved people and free blacks to revolt. These were actual criminal charges. The seditious libel that Reuben Crandall was charged with has to do with the fact that he was publishing abolitionist things, basically decrying the institution of slavery as evil, sinful, and something that needed to be abolished. This was against the law in DC in 1835. Okay. So after the white racist mob could not catch up with Reuben, Francis Fuckboy, Francis Scott Fuckboy Key charged Reuben with these charges. And Reuben was given a very high bond and was not able to bond out of DC jail. And he spent 8 months in DC jail before his trial. I'm gonna get to his trial in a second, the outcome, because it's significant. But hold on, because some other shit happened, y'all. So Reuben got hemmed up by the white mob, or at least attempted to get hemmed up by the white mob, and then the boys caught up with him and put him in jail. That was August 10th, 1835. What the fuck happened August 11th, 1835 in Washington, D.C.? So those same striking white laborers who worked at DC's Navy Yard, because they couldn't catch up with Reuben, this race trader, Reuben, nigger lover, Crandall, because they couldn't catch up with Reuben's nigger loving ass, they said, well, fuck it, we just go get some actual niggas. And they said, well, where should we go? They said, let's go to that uppity nigger Beverly Snow's restaurant. And I know y'all like, Kim, who is Beverly Snow? Who is she? Well, first of all, Beverly is not a she. Beverly is a he. His name is Beverly Snow. And let me just, as a side note, just as a public service announcement, kids, if you ever encounter black men named Beverly, Tracy, Stacy, Leslie, I suggest you don't fuck with them, okay? Because them niggas with ladies' names is about that action. And I cannot prove it. It is not empirical for me to draw this conclusion. Just I know what I'm talking about. So if you ever cross paths with a man, particularly a black man named Beverly, I suggest you leave him alone. So anyway, Beverly Snow, a well-known Washington black restaurateur, Beverly Snow, who was born in Virginia into slavery. Thank you, Will. I know I'm telling the story, y'all. This is a good story. So Beverly Snow, okay, black man, owned a restaurant at 6th and Pennsylvania Southeast called Beverly. No, is it Snow's or Beverly's? I think it was Snow's Epicurean Eating House was the name of his restaurant. Okay. And when I tell you this nigga was fancy, this nigga was so fancy. They wrote it up in the paper how nice the Epicurean Eating House was. They was in there serving pheasant, okay? So the rumor had got out that Beverly Snow had been disparaging the wives and daughters of these striking white laborers from the Navy Yard, okay? And somehow the whites got wind of it. Who knows if it was actually true? Who cares? I mean, but it cares. It has some bearing on the story. So here come the whites, right? They go to Beverly's restaurant. Y'all know what they did, right? What do they always do? They tore the shit up. They tore it up. They bust up the restaurant. They drank up all Beverly's whiskey and his champagne. Beverly was able to escape his restaurant by the skin of his teeth. They went looking for him in his house. Thankfully, Beverly was able to escape the clutches of the white mob. But this uprising, again, the whites, the violent racist whites, deeply unhappy that they could not get the nigga lover race trader in Reuben Crandall, and then they could not get the uppity nigga in Beverly Snow. So what did they do? What they always do? They took the shit out on the rest of the black community. The whites destroyed black homes, schools, churches, businesses. The hard work of free black folks who had either been previously enslaved or themselves are descendants of those, like immediate descendants, like next generation of those that had been enslaved. That is what the whites did. It's called the Snow Riots of Washington, D.C. from the summer of 1835. And I assure you, the disappointment that I had in myself and in my public school system that I am 45 big years old and I never heard of this racial domestic terrorism incident that occurred in Washington, D.C., right down the street. I had never heard of the Snow Riots. So let me tell you really quickly about Beverly Snow. Beverly Snow was able to escape the clutches, is able to escape the rowdy whites, the violent, murderous whites coming to kill him, right? He and his wife, Julia, ended up escaping to Toronto, Canada, where in Toronto, Beverly and Julia opened up four establishments there in Toronto, and they spent the rest of their days there. They died. They are buried today at Toronto's Necropolis Cemetery. So I thought that was incredible. Beverly Snow, a black man who was described to be of mixed race, was born into slavery in Lynchburg, Virginia, and ended up living his final days in Toronto, Canada, after escaping a racist white mob in Washington, D.C. Fucking amazing. So that's Beverly's story. That's the Snow Riots. Let me get back to Randall. God damn it, not Randall. Reuben Crandall, my man's. Reuben Crandall about it. Reuben Crandall, charged by Francis Scott Key, fuckboy, right? Francis Scott fuckboy Key is who charged and prosecuted Reuben Crandall for seditious libel and trying to incite enslaved people and free blacks to revolt. Charged him criminally. This story was picked up by the press, and Reuben was viewed mostly as sympathetic, right? And it turns out after the conclusion of the trial, he was found innocent of all charges. But as I told you before, he had been held in DC jail for, I believe, a period of 8 months. And while he was detained awaiting trial, he contracted tuberculosis and became sick. So even after he was acquitted, he ended up leaving the US and went to Kingston, Jamaica, where he died at age 32 as a result of the TB that he had contracted while he was in jail awaiting his trial. And it it's such a story because, for one, Reuben's acquittal ended Francis Scott Key's political career. Okay. He was finished. It was such a humiliating defeat for Francis Scott Key that I believe that was it for him in politics. And as I said, when Francis Scott Key died, he died owning 8 Africans. Part anecdotally, part of a smaller part of Francis Scott Key's overall history as it pertains to his relationship with his enslaved Africans was that he actually freed one African, but hired him to oversee the other remaining ones that he still owned. And I said, oh my God, Michael Render would be so proud. Killer Mike would have called Francis Scott Key a good white man for freeing one of his enslaved Africans so that enslaved African could rent out his services back to the white man enslaver so he could keep an eye, oversee, if you will, oversee the remaining enslaved people. And here come y'all fucking goofy ass president Joe Biden laying praise to this motherfucker. And let me tell y'all something. When they rebuild this goddamn bridge, if they name this shit the Francis Scott Key Bridge, I will be, as one of my famous sayings goes, I will be incandescent with rage. I will be furious if they build this brand new ass bridge where these 6 brown men lost their lives trying to maintain the bridge, and they gonna build the bridge anew and name it after the fucking enslaver. God help us. Now, who, Kim, someone say, Kim, who do you want the bridge to be named after? I don't know. I'm gonna say Benjamin Banneker because the bridge is in Baltimore County. Benjamin Banneker is a Baltimore County all-star. And if we not naming shit after enslavers, which I thought we had stopped doing that, Democrats. Didn't we change course on that policy? Didn't we, after George Floyd, didn't we decide to go in different directions? Watch Joe Biden name that fucking bridge after Francis Scott Fuckboy. Watch what I tell you. And watch Governor Melonhead Moore. That's it, boss. Yeah, boss. Our first black governor, Governor Melonhead. Governor Melonhead going to applaud that shit. Oh, Francis Scott Key was a great Marylander. He wasn't perfect. But look at what he gave to us. His enduring legacy of the Star Spangled Banner. I mean, just simply cannot be ignored. Fuck you, dog. This nigga owns slaves. Okay, that's a red line. Fuck him. We don't honor no shit, no aspect of no enslavers. Period. I don't give a fuck what they wrote. And by the way, Francis Scott Key, semi-complicated in his legacy, even beyond what he did as the U.S. attorney in D.C. He did, as a lawyer, represent both freed black folks in cases, but also represented slave owners trying to reclaim their enslaved property. And that's typical of Democrats. Like, he was a perfect liberal, was he not? Like, he was down with all the enslavers, but would occasionally, remember or be reminded that, the black is a human. Right. Anyway, y'all, I just wanted to share that with you. I hope you guys learned something. I learned something. The snow riots in Washington, D.C. of 1835, a combination of white resentment, white hatred of black success, and white hatred of race traitors. And let me say this to our white friends, guys. Like, I appreciate the stances that y'all take on positions. I appreciate the way you try to enlighten your white family and friends into anti-racism. I appreciate these things. I do. But again, I understand it's not without consequence. Like, the reason why Reuben Crandall had to remain in jail and was not given a bond is because the system was basically like, oh, you a nigga lover, huh? Oh, okay, well, how about this, nigga lover? How about you love this nigga treatment? And they gave him the nigga treatment. And it's painful and it hurts. And it's not without consequence to take the stances and to be on the right side of justice and righteousness. So I just want y'all to know, we appreciate it because we understand it is not at all without risk. So please go do more research on Reuben Crandall and research his sister Prudence, who, again, a hell of a white woman for her time, who was determined to educate black girls in Connecticut. I was impressed with these folks. I said, okay, Rhode Island. I didn't know y'all was making the whites like this. Okay, make more. Great. All right, gang. That's the show. Thank you guys so much for